The crystal halls of the Confederation's Senate buzzed with angry voices from dozens of different species. Massive screens showed images of Earth spinning slowly in space, looking peaceful and blue. But the creatures gathered in the chamber saw something else entirely. They saw danger. Ambassador Thrall's scaled hands gripped the podium as his yellow eyes scanned the assembly. His people, the Draxians, had conquered 40 star systems through pure military might. Nothing had ever stood against their fleets, and won. Yet here he was, asking for help to deal with a single planet. "These humans multiply faster than plague rats," Thrall hissed, his forked tongue flickering between sharp teeth. In just 50 Earth years, they went from simple metal flying machines to ships that can travel between stars. No species develops this quickly without outside help. A ripple of agreement passed through the chamber. The aquatic Nereid representative floated in her water-filled sphere, her tentacles writhing with agitation. Through her translator, her voice bubbled with concern. "Our deep space monitors show human ships spreading through their system like infection. They build colonies on dead rocks and somehow make them live. This is not natural behavior." The Quartz Collective's representative stood like a living diamond, light refracting through his crystalline body as he spoke. His kind thought only in numbers and probabilities. Analysis complete. Human expansion rate suggests total galactic. Colonization within 847 standard years. Threat probability to existing order 78.3%. Recommended action: immediate containment. Supreme Chancellor Vorin had listened to these debates for weeks. His species, the Eternals, had ruled the galaxy for so long that most younger races thought they were myths. He had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore, but something about these humans troubled him in ways he could not explain. "Show me their military again," Vorin commanded, his ancient voice echoing through the chamber. The screens changed to display human warships. Compared to Confederation vessels, they looked like toys made by children. Their hulls were simple metal, plates welded together. Their weapons were basic projectile launchers and primitive energy beams. Their largest ship was smaller than a Draxian patrol craft. 47 ships, announced the military analyst. Total crew, approximately 15,000 beings. No energy shielding, no dimensional drives, no quantum weaponry. Their most advanced technology appears to be basic artificial intelligence and nuclear fusion. Laughter echoed through the chamber from several species. The idea that such primitive creatures could threaten anyone seemed absurd, yet the evidence kept mounting. Human ships were appearing in new star systems every month. Their colonies grew from nothing to thriving cities in mere years. They seemed to turn everything they touched into something useful. "I have studied there." "Communications," said Ambassador Keel of the Monitoring Guild. His gray skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as he spoke. "They have something we do not see in other species. They call it hope. Even when facing impossible situations, they believe they will find a way to win." "Hope is not a military strategy," Thrall growled. "One demonstration of our power will end their expansion forever. They will see our fleets and surrender immediately, just like every other species we have encountered." Chancellor Vorin closed his ancient eyes and thought of the thousands of species that now served the Confederation. All had followed the same pattern. First came contact, then negotiation, then submission when faced with overwhelming force. It had worked for millennia. "Very well," Vorin finally said. "We will send the Third Battle Fleet to their system, standard containment protocol. Show them our power. Demand they limit their expansion and accept Confederation oversight of their technology. If they refuse, we will demonstrate the consequences of defying us." The chamber erupted in approval. War Commander Blix of the Draxian Navy stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. "I will lead the fleet personally, Chancellor. These humans will learn that the galaxy has an order, and we enforce it." 3 days later, the largest fleet in Confederation history jumped into hyperspace, headed for the Sol system. 2,000 ships of various sizes and capabilities, all bristling with weapons that could crack planets. War Commander Blix sat in his command chair aboard the massive Dreadnought Dominator, studying reports about human capabilities. His intelligence officers had assured him this would be simple. Humans had no experience with galactic warfare. They had never faced energy, shields, or quantum torpedoes. Their tactics were based on fighting other humans, not dealing with truly alien forms of warfare. The entire operation should be complete within hours of arrival. Light years away, Captain Reed sat in the cramped command center of Monitoring Station Prometheus, the most distant human outpost in the solar system. His job was to watch for asteroids, or comets that might threaten the inner planets. The work was boring, routine, and absolutely essential. That morning started like any other until his sensors detected something impossible. Energy signatures, unlike anything in human databases, were approaching from deep space, hundreds of them, then thousands. "This is Prometheus Station calling Earth Command," Reed spoke into his communicator, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. "We have unknown contacts approaching the outer system. Count is over 2,000 and rising. Repeat, we have an incoming fleet of unknown origin." On Earth, Admiral Torres received the message while reviewing defense plans that suddenly seemed inadequate. Humanity had prepared for many possibilities, but not for this. 47 ships against 2,000. The mathematics were brutal and clear. The alien fleet settled into formation just beyond the orbit of Pluto, their ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns that spoke of military discipline, refined over countless campaigns. War Commander Blix looked at the tactical display showing the pathetic human fleet racing to meet them and almost felt sorry for them. The message came on all human frequencies, translated into perfect English by computers that had been studying human communications for decades. "Humans of Earth, I am War Commander Blix of the Galactic Confederation. Your species has been deemed a potential threat to galactic stability. You will immediately cease all expansion beyond your home system and submit your advanced technologies for Confederation review. You have 72 standard hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in the complete destruction of your military forces and the occupation of your worlds. This is your only warning." Admiral Torres stood in Earth's command center, surrounded by screens showing the massive alien fleet. Every military advisor, every scientist, every politician was calling for immediate surrender. The odds were impossible. Resistance was suicide. But Torres thought of his daughter sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware that aliens were threatening everything she would ever know or love. He thought of the human colonies on Mars and Europa, of the children born among the stars who had never seen Earth but called it home. "Open a channel to the alien fleet," he ordered. His response was simple, direct, and would echo through galactic history. "We respectfully decline." War Commander Blix stared at the communication display in disbelief. In 3,000 years of Confederation expansion, no species had ever refused their initial offer when faced with overwhelming force. The humans had just broken every rule of galactic politics. "Sir, shall we begin the demonstration bombardment?" asked his tactical officer, a thin creature with 4 arms and pale blue skin. The standard protocol was to destroy a few minor targets to show the aliens how outmatched they were. "No," Blix growled, his reptilian features twisting with anger. "They want to test our resolve. We will give them a proper battle and crush their entire fleet. Let every species in the galaxy see what happens when someone defies the Confederation." The human fleet had arranged itself in a defensive formation between the alien armada and Earth, 47 ships against 2,000. Admiral Torres knew his forces would be destroyed, but every minute they bought gave Earth more time to prepare its final defenses. The battle began at dawn, Earth time. The alien fleet advanced in perfect formation, their energy shields shimmering, like soap bubbles around each ship. War Commander Blix had chosen to make this educational. He would show the galaxy how easily superior technology could defeat primitive determination. The first human missiles struck the alien shields and exploded harmlessly, creating brief flashes of light that faded into nothing. Kinetic projectiles bounced off energy barriers like rain on windows. The aliens returned fire with weapons that turned space itself into a weapon, tearing holes in reality that snapped shut with brilliant flashes. 3 human ships died in the first exchange, their hulls simply ceasing to exist where the alien weapons touched them. But something strange happened as the battle continued. The humans did not retreat. They did not call for surrender. Instead, they began to change their tactics in ways that made no sense. Captain Murphy commanded the destroyer Phoenix, one of humanity's newest ships. His crew was young and inexperienced, most having never seen combat before today. They should have been paralyzed with fear, but instead they were working with desperate efficiency. "Sir, their shields pulse in a rotating frequency pattern," reported. His science officer, a former student who should have been terrified but instead sounded excited. "If we can match our weapons to the pulse rhythm, we might be able to slip shots through during the transition periods," Murphy gave the order without hesitation. The Phoenix began firing its weapons in strange rhythmic bursts that seemed random to the aliens watching. Then, one of their escort ships suddenly exploded as a human projectile punched through its shields at the exact moment they were recalibrating. The news spread through the alien fleet instantly. The primitive humans had somehow figured out their shield technology in the middle of a battle. War Commander Blix ordered his ships to randomize their shield frequencies, but the humans adapted again within minutes. What the aliens did not understand was that humanity had spent centuries fighting wars against each other. Every human military officer had studied thousands of battles where weaker forces had defeated stronger ones through superior tactics, better intelligence, or simple luck. They knew how to turn disadvantages into advantages. The human fleet suddenly broke formation and scattered in all directions. To alien commanders trained in traditional warfare, this looked like panic. Scattered forces were weak forces, easy to hunt down and destroy one by one. But the humans were not panicking. They were implementing something the aliens had never seen. Captain Walsh of the cruiser Defiance led her ship on what appeared to be a suicidal charge straight toward the alien command vessel. Enemy fire tore her ship apart piece by piece, but she kept coming. At the last second, she changed course and rammed her crippled vessel into a cluster of alien fighters, destroying 6 ships with her sacrifice. This was not military strategy as the aliens understood it. This was something far more dangerous. These humans were not just fighting to win a battle. They were fighting as if the survival of their entire species depended on every shot, every maneuver, every sacrifice. War Commander Blix watched his tactical display with growing unease. His fleet was still winning, but they were losing ships at an impossible rate. Human vessels that should have been destroyed kept fighting with half their systems offline. Crews that should have surrendered instead turned their damaged ships into weapons. The turning point came when Lieutenant Davis, commanding a small patrol ship called Ranger, noticed something about the alien formations. They moved with mathematical precision, following patterns that were probably thousands of years old. Human formations looked chaotic by comparison, but Davis realized that chaos itself could be a weapon. "All ships, this is Ranger," Davis broadcast, on the human fleet frequency. "Stop trying to fight them like we fight each other. They cannot predict what they have never seen. Be unpredictable. Be impossible. Be human." What followed broke every rule of space warfare. Human ships began moving in patterns that defied logic. They used debris from destroyed vessels as weapons, hurling chunks of metal at alien ships with precisely calculated trajectories. They fired their weapons while spinning, creating cone-shaped fields of destruction that were impossible to avoid. The cruiser Marathon, commanded by Captain Lee, had lost all its main weapons but still had maneuvering thrusters. Lee ordered his crew to ram their ship into an alien dreadnought, but at the last second used the thrusters to spin the Marathon like a drill bit. The human ship tore through the alien vessel's shields and hull, destroying both ships but taking out the alien fleet's command center. By the time the first day of battle ended, the alien fleet had lost over 300 ships to humanity's 31. War Commander Blix sat in his command chair, staring at casualty reports that made no mathematical sense. His forces had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior training. They should have won easily. "Sir, the humans are requesting communication," his communications officer reported. Admiral Torres appeared on the alien command screen, his uniform torn and a bandage across his forehead. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed damage from the battle, but his crew was still at their stations. "War Commander Blix," Torres said calmly, "you have seen what we are willing to sacrifice to defend our home. This is your chance to withdraw with honor. Leave our system, and we will not pursue you." Blix felt something he had never experienced in centuries of warfare. These primitive creatures were offering him mercy after defeating a third of his fleet. The arrogance should have been insulting, but instead it was terrifying. They spoke as if they were the ones with superior firepower. "This is not over, human," Blix responded. "You have won a single battle. I have called for reinforcements. The Void Hunters themselves are coming to your system. They have never lost a campaign in 3,000 years. Torres nodded, as if he had expected this. "Then we will be waiting for them. But I want you to understand something, War Commander. Today you learned that humans do not fight the same way as other species. We do not calculate odds or measure acceptable losses. We fight as if everything we have ever loved depends on victory, because it does. Remember that when your reinforcements arrive." The communication ended, leaving Blix alone with reports he did not want to send to the Confederation High Command. How do you explain that a primitive species had outfought the galaxy's most advanced military? How do you describe tactics that made no sense but somehow worked? As his fleet regrouped beyond human weapons range, War Commander Blix realized something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The humans had not just defeated his ships. They had shown him something that the Confederation had forgotten in its long centuries of easy victories. They had shown him what desperation looked like when it was combined with intelligence, courage, and the absolute refusal to surrender. And for the first time in his military career, Blix was afraid of what would happen next. Deep in the void between galaxies, ancient ships stirred from their eternal patrol. The Void Hunters had served the Confederation for 3 millennia, appearing only when conventional forces failed. They were legend made real, warriors who existed, partially outside normal space and time. Their leader, Grand Marshal Crix, had personally overseen the subjugation of 400 worlds. The message from War Commander Blix had reached the High Command like a shockwave. A primitive species had not only refused Confederation demands, but had actually defeated a major fleet in open combat. Such a thing was impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had somehow broken the natural order of the galaxy. Grand Marshal Crix materialized on his flagship, his form shifting between dimensions as he moved. His species had transcended physical existence centuries ago, becoming beings of pure energy contained in crystalline armor. The Void Hunters under his command were recruited from dozens of species, all enhanced beyond their natural limits. "Deploy." "The reality disruptors," Crix commanded, his voice echoing across multiple dimensions. "These humans believe their primitive tactics can defeat superior technology. We will show them what true power looks like." The siege of the Sol system began, 8 months after the first battle. This time, there would be no dramatic fleet engagement. The Void Hunters came like shadows, their ships phasing in and out of normal space, attacking human outposts and supply lines, before vanishing back into the dimensional void. On Mars, the colonists watched their orbital defense platforms die one by one, picked off by weapons that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. Colony Administrator Brown gathered the surviving population in the underground mining tunnels that had been their first shelter when they arrived. "They can destroy our ships and our stations," Brown told the frightened families huddled in the tunnels. "But they still need to come down here if they want to take our world. And down here, their fancy technology has to deal with good old-fashioned human stubbornness." The colonists had been miners and engineers before the war began. Now they became guerrilla fighters, using their industrial equipment in ways that horrified the alien invaders. Massive drilling machines designed to extract ore became mobile fortresses. Chemical processing plants turned into weapon factories. The entire colony became a trap, waiting for the aliens to spring it. When the Void Hunters finally landed on Mars, they found themselves fighting a war unlike anything in their experience. The humans did not meet them in open battle. Instead, they turned the planet itself into a weapon. Mining explosives collapsed tunnel systems on top of advancing alien forces. Automated mining robots, reprogrammed for combat, emerged from underground to attack supply convoys before disappearing back into the labyrinth of tunnels. Lieutenant Davis, the same officer who had noticed the alien formation patterns in the first battle, led a desperate mission to capture intact Void Hunter technology. His team used construction mechs, massive machines designed for building colonies, as improvised assault vehicles. The aliens had never seen anything like it. "Sir, their weapons are designed to fight military equipment," reported Sergeant Kim, piloting a modified tunnel-boring machine. "But our construction gear does not register as a threat to their targeting systems. We are invisible until we are close enough to grab them." The mission succeeded beyond all expectations. Davis and his team captured not just weapons and equipment, but actual Void Hunter prisoners. For the first time in the war, humans could interrogate their enemies and learn how they thought. What they discovered changed everything. The aliens were not just technologically superior, they were psychologically unable to comprehend human behavior. Every Confederation species fought according to logical principles refined over thousands of years. They calculated acceptable losses, measured strategic objectives, and surrendered when defeat became mathematically certain. Humans did none of these things. They fought as if mathematics did not exist, as if logic was optional, as if the universe itself would bend to their will if they just refused to give up. To alien minds, this was not warfare. It was madness. The asteroid belt became the next battlefield, and here, human insanity reached new heights. The mining stations scattered throughout the belt had been abandoned when the siege began, but they were not empty. Human engineers had stayed behind, turning each station into an automated weapons platform controlled by artificial intelligence programs with one simple instruction: destroy anything that was not human. Grand Marshal Crix found himself fighting a war against an entire star system. Every piece of space debris had been weaponized. Every asteroid contained hidden weapon platforms. The humans had turned their own solar system into the largest minefield in galactic history. But it was the defense of Earth itself that finally made the aliens understand what they were truly fighting. As Void Hunter ships breached the orbital defense grid, humanity evacuated their civilian population underground and turned their cities into weapons. Every skyscraper became a missile platform. Every subway tunnel became a staging area for counterattacks. The humans did not defend their world in the traditional sense. Instead, they made it impossible for the aliens to occupy anything without fighting for every street, every building, every room. Children who should have been in school were helping engineers turn playground equipment into improvised anti-aircraft guns. Elderly people who should have been safe in retirement were coordinating supply lines for guerrilla fighters. Grand Marshal Crix stood in the ruins of what had once been New York City, watching human resistance fighters emerge from the rubble, to attack his forces before melting back into the destroyed landscape. His sensors could not track them. His weapons could not target them effectively. They seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with deadly precision, and vanish before his forces could respond. "These creatures are not fighting a military campaign," he reported to the Confederation High Command. "They are defending their offspring, their genetic legacy, their entire species' future. Every human we face fights as if they personally know every other human who has ever lived or ever will live." The response from the High Command was predictable. Increase the pressure, deploy more devastating weapons, break their will to resist. But Crix was beginning to understand that the humans had no breaking point. They would fight until every last. One of them was dead, and even then they would probably find a way to keep fighting. The turning point came when human forces launched their most audacious operation yet. While the Void Hunters focused on conquering Earth, small groups of human ships had been mapping every alien supply route, command post, and staging area within 50 light years of Sol. They had been using captured alien technology and human engineering to build ships that could match Void Hunter capabilities. Commander Hayes led the strike force that simultaneously hit 17 different alien positions across multiple star systems. The message was clear and terrifying. Humanity could reach anywhere the Confederation could reach, and they would never stop coming. The attacks were not just military victories, they were psychological warfare at its most devastating. The aliens realized that the humans they were fighting were not desperate defenders trapped in their home system. They were a species that had already spread beyond their sun, and every human colony represented a potential source of new warriors who would fight with the same desperate fury as those defending Earth. Grand Marshal Crix received reports of human attacks on bases that were supposed to be secret, supply convoys that were supposed to be protected, and command centers that were supposed to be impregnable. Somehow, these primitive creatures had not just matched Confederation intelligence capabilities, they had exceeded them. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Void Hunters were losing a campaign. Not because they lacked firepower or technology, but because they were fighting an enemy that refused to accept defeat under any circumstances. As Grand Marshal Crix prepared for what he now realized would be the final battle, he sent one last message to the Confederation High Command. "We are not fighting a military force. We are fighting an entire species that has chosen extinction over surrender. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment." The reply was brief and final. "Crush them." But Crix was no longer sure that was possible. These humans had shown him something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare, about logic, about the natural order of the universe. They had shown him what happened when an intelligent species decided that some things were worth any price, and that losing was simply not an option. The siege of Sol was ending, but not the way anyone had expected. On Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, Colonel Brooks crouched in a tunnel carved from ice, listening to her daughter's voice through a communication device that should not have worked this far from Earth. 8-year-old Amy was singing a lullaby. Their family had shared for generations, unaware that her mother was fighting for her right to grow up free. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" Amy's voice carried across the vastness of space, distorted by interference from the alien jamming systems, but still crystal clear in Brooks' heart. "Soon, sweetheart," Brooks whispered back, knowing it was probably a lie. The Void Hunters had surrounded Europa 3 days ago, and her garrison of engineers and scientists had already lost half their number. "Mommy has some work to finish first." The alien monitoring stations intercepted this conversation, as they had intercepted thousands of similar communications throughout the Sol system. What began as routine intelligence gathering became something far more disturbing. The alien analysts found themselves listening to humans saying goodbye to their children, promising to see each other again, sharing memories and dreams and hope. across impossible distances. War Commander Blix, still recovering from his defeats in the outer system, found himself reading these intercepted messages in his private quarters aboard his damaged flagship. He had requested them for tactical intelligence, looking for information about human troop movements or supply lines. Instead, he found something that made his scales crawl with an emotion he had never experienced before. A human soldier named Peterson, trapped on a disabled ship drifting toward the sun, had spent his final hours recording messages for his son's future birthdays, knowing he would not live to deliver them personally. "Happy 10th birthday, Tommy. Daddy wants you to know that everything I did because I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Another message, from a female engineer on Mars. "Tell my mom I kept the promise I made when I joined the colony program. Tell her that her little girl helped build something beautiful among the stars and that it will last forever because we refused to let anyone take it away." These were not the communications of a military force. These were the final words of parents, children, brothers, sisters, friends who were facing death not for conquest or glory, but for the simple right to exist as themselves. The aliens began to understand that they were not fighting soldiers. They were fighting an entire civilization that had chosen to defend its future with every breath in its body. Dr. Martinez, Earth's lead xenobiologist, made the discovery that would change galactic history while analyzing captured Void Hunter equipment. Working in a bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva, she had spent months dissecting alien technology, trying to understand how beings from different worlds could coordinate such devastating attacks. What she found was more terrifying than any weapon. The Confederation species had evolved beyond the survival instincts that still drove humanity. They fought wars as calculated exercises in resource acquisition and territorial expansion. Defeat was simply another word for acceptable losses have been exceeded. They surrendered when logic dictated that further resistance was inefficient. "They do not understand us because they cannot understand us," Martinez recorded in her final research notes. "Every species in the Confederation has been civilized for thousands of years. They have forgotten what it means to fight for survival against extinction. They wage war like a business transaction, but we wage war like cornered animals protecting our young." Her research revealed something that the aliens had missed entirely. Humans were not just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for their genetic legacy, their cultural inheritance, their species' right to continue existing. Every human who died fighting was dying not just for themselves, but for every human child who might someday be born. This revelation spread through the alien fleet like a virus. Species that had conquered hundreds of worlds suddenly found themselves questioning why they fought. When faced with extinction, they surrendered to preserve their lives. But humans faced with extinction fought harder, as if death itself was just another enemy to be defeated. Colonel Brooks demonstrated this when her position on Europa became hopeless. The Void Hunters had broken through her defenses and were advancing through the ice tunnels toward the civilian shelters. Any reasonable military commander would have negotiated surrender terms to save lives. Instead, Brooks coordinated with the civilian scientists to turn Europa's geysers into improvised weapons. Using her knowledge of the moon's geology and the scientists' expertise with the mining equipment, they created a trap that would destroy the alien assault force and most of the human colony along with it. Her final message to Earth Command was recorded as geyser systems all across Europa prepared to vent superheated water and steam directly into the alien advance. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise. Tell her mommy fought for her future, and that future is safe now. Brooks out." The explosion was visible from Earth, a brief new star that flickered and died as Europa's surface cracked and reformed. The entire Void Hunter assault force was destroyed, but so was the human colony. Brooks had chosen mutual annihilation over surrender, and somehow this felt like victory to the humans who received her final transmission. Grand Marshal Crix studied the tactical reports from Europa with growing horror. His forces had superior technology, superior numbers, and superior strategic position. But they were losing because they were fighting an enemy that calculated victory differently. To the Confederation, winning meant achieving objectives with acceptable losses. To humans, winning meant the enemy did not achieve their objectives, regardless of cost. The psychological impact on alien forces became impossible to ignore. Soldiers who had fought for centuries began experiencing what humans called nightmares. They dreamed of human warriors who continued fighting with mortal wounds, who turned their own deaths into weapons against their enemies, who smiled as they died because their sacrifice might save someone they would never meet. Alien psychiatrists, trying to understand these new mental disorders, found themselves studying human concepts like honor, sacrifice, and love. These were not military terms. They were emotional states that the Confederation species had evolved beyond, considering them primitive and inefficient. But the humans had weaponized their emotions. They fought not with cold logic, but with burning passion. Every battle was personal to them. Every victory was shared with their entire species. Every defeat was mourned as a family tragedy. The breaking point came when Supreme Chancellor Vorin himself arrived in the Sol system aboard his personal dreadnought, expecting to oversee humanity's final surrender. He had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species had existed, and he had never encountered a problem that sufficient force could not solve. Instead, he found himself reading reports that challenged every assumption about intelligent behavior. Humans were not responding to overwhelming force by calculating their odds and surrendering. They were responding by fighting harder, as if the presence of his personal fleet was a challenge to be met rather than a demonstration to be feared. They are not behaving rationally, he told his advisors, reviewing footage of human attacks that defied every principle of military strategy. They sacrifice valuable resources for marginal tactical gains. They expend lives to achieve objectives with no strategic value. They fight as if they have unlimited reserves when we know they are nearly defeated. His chief strategist, an ancient being whose species had served the Confederation since its founding, offered the analysis that would haunt Voran's dreams. Chancellor, I believe we have misunderstood what we are fighting. We assumed these humans were a military force defending territory, but they are not defending territory. They are defending their genetic future, their cultural inheritance, their right to exist as an independent species. They fight not for what they have, but for what their children might someday become. As the final battle approached, Supreme Chancellor Voran realized that victory would require the complete extinction of humanity. Anything less would leave survivors who would remember what the Confederation had tried to do, and those survivors would never stop seeking revenge. The humans had turned their own potential extinction into their greatest weapon. For the first time in his ancient existence, Vorin questioned whether winning was worth the price of victory. Admiral Torres stood in the ruins of what had once been Earth's primary command center, surrounded by officers whose uniforms were torn and stained with the dust of collapsed buildings. Through the shattered windows, he could see the alien fleet. In orbit, thousands of ships waiting for the final order to begin the bombardment that would end human civilization. But Torres was not thinking about defeat. He was thinking about the reports flooding in from across the galaxy, carried by human ships that had been moving through space for months, while the Confederation focused on the siege of Sol. Humanity's final gambit was about to begin. Commander. Hayes materialized on the communication screen, her image flickering with interference from 12 light-years away. Behind her, the bridge of her ship showed damage from recent combat, but her crew was working with the desperate efficiency that had become humanity's signature. Admiral, we are in position at 17 different targets, Hayes reported. Confederation, supply depots, command stations, and recruitment centers across 4 sectors. They never saw us coming because they never imagined we would leave our home system while it was under siege. Torres nodded, feeling something like pride despite the desperate circumstances. While the galaxy watched the siege of Sol, assuming humanity was trapped and dying, human reconnaissance units had been mapping every weakness in the Confederation's vast empire. They had used captured alien technology, reverse-engineered enemy ships, and pure human ingenuity to become invisible ghosts, moving through enemy space. Supreme Chancellor Voran stood on the bridge of his personal dreadnought, preparing to give the order that would end this irritating rebellion forever. His weapons could crack planets, and Earth's defenses were nearly exhausted. One final demonstration of power would surely convince any surviving humans to surrender. That was when the reports began flooding in. Chancellor, we are receiving emergency transmissions from the Kepler sector. The supply depot at Zarian Prime is under attack by unknown forces. Sir, long-range sensors detect explosions at the command station in the Vega system. Chancellor, the recruitment center at Alpha Centauri has gone silent. Last transmission indicated hostile boarding action. Voran stared at the tactical displays, showing attacks spread across hundreds of light-years of space. This was impossible. The human fleet was here, trapped in their home system, facing annihilation. How could they be attacking Confederation positions throughout the galaxy? Admiral Torres opened a communication channel that reached every ship in both fleets, every monitoring station in the system, and every alien world within communication range. When he spoke, his voice was calm, tired, but absolutely certain. Supreme. Chancellor Voran, you came to our home. You threatened our children. You tried to destroy our future. You assumed that because we defended ourselves here, we had no capacity to strike back. You were wrong. The communication screens throughout the Confederation fleet showed tactical data that made no sense. Human forces were simultaneously attacking targets across 17 different star systems using ships and weapons that should not exist, coordinating strikes with precision that suggested years of planning. While you besieged our worlds, we mapped yours, Torres continued. While you destroyed our cities, we learned the location of every supply depot, every command center, every critical facility in your empire. We know where your leaders live. We know where your children sleep. We know how to hurt you in ways you never imagined possible. Commander Hayes' voice joined the broadcast from the Kepler sector. Confederation supply depot Zarian Prime has been destroyed. Their fuel reserves for 3 sectors are gone. Estimated impact on fleet operations. Total. Another human commander reported from the Vega system. Command Station Beta 7 is offline. All communication relays in this region are down. The Confederation High Command has lost contact with 12 battle fleets. The reports continued flooding in as human strike teams simultaneously hit targets that were supposed to be secret, protected, impossible to reach. Voran realized with growing horror that these primitive creatures had not just survived his assault. They had used it as cover to spread throughout Confederation space like a virus, learning everything, mapping everything, preparing for this moment. You see, Chancellor, Torres said, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and unbreakable determination. You made one critical mistake. You assumed we would fight like you fight. You assumed we would calculate acceptable losses and surrender when defeat became mathematically certain. You assumed we were rational. Grand Marshal Crix, listening from his flagship, felt something he had never experienced in 3,000 years of warfare. These humans were not just threatening military targets. They were demonstrating that they could strike anywhere in Confederation space at any time. They had turned the galaxy's greatest strength, its vast size, into its greatest weakness. We are not rational, Torres continued. We are parents fighting for our children's future. We are explorers who refuse to be caged. We are dreamers who will not accept that the universe belongs to someone else. You wanted to contain us, but you cannot contain an idea, and the idea of humanity is simple. We will go where we choose, do what we believe is right, and no one in this universe has the authority to stop us. The alien fleets began receiving damage reports from across their territory. Human attacks were not just destroying military targets. They were hitting the infrastructure that held the Confederation together. Communication networks were failing. Supply lines were severed. The careful logistics that supported fleets across hundreds of star systems were collapsing. But worse than the physical damage was the psychological impact. Every Confederation species was receiving the same message. Humanity could reach them anywhere. These creatures who had been dismissed as primitive had somehow learned to fight a war across galactic distances, striking with coordination that suggested intelligence networks the Confederation had never detected. "This is your choice, Chancellor," Torres said, his image steady despite the destruction visible around him. "You can order the destruction of Earth, and we will die fighting, as we have lived. But our ships are already beyond your reach, carrying humans who will remember what you tried to do to us. They will carry our children to new worlds, and those children will grow up knowing that the Confederation tried to destroy their species for the crime of existing." Supreme Chancellor Vorin stared at reports showing the systematic dismantling of his empire's critical infrastructure. These attacks were not random acts of vengeance. They were surgical strikes designed to cripple the Confederation's ability to project power across galactic distances. The humans had identified every weakness in a system that had worked flawlessly for millennia. "Or," Torres continued, "you can withdraw your fleets, establish a quarantine zone around our territory, and learn to coexist with a species that refuses to be anyone's subjects. The choice is yours, but understand this. We will never surrender. We will never stop expanding, and we will never forget what you have shown us about the galaxy we live in." The communication ended, leaving Vorin alone with a decision that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. His weapons could still destroy Earth, but the cost was no longer acceptable. These humans had proven they could survive anything, adapt to anything, and turn any defeat into a future victory. War Commander Blix, his reptilian features showing exhaustion from months of impossible battles, spoke the words that echoed through every alien mind. "Chancellor, recommendation is immediate strategic withdrawal. These creatures do not fight wars. They fight crusades, and crusaders never surrender." Grand Marshal Crix, his dimensional form flickering with uncertainty, added his analysis. "Sir, they have demonstrated the ability to strike our core systems while defending their own. Continued engagement risks not just military defeat, but civilizational collapse. They fight as if they have nothing to lose because they consider freedom more valuable than life." Supreme Chancellor Vorin closed his ancient eyes and thought of the thousands of species that served the Confederation in peace and prosperity. He thought of the stability that had lasted for millennia, the order that had brought science and culture to hundreds of worlds. Then he thought of these impossible humans who would rather die than accept that order. "All fleets, this is Supreme Chancellor Vorin," he broadcast on all Confederation frequencies. "By unanimous decision of the High Command, all hostile operations against humanity are terminated immediately. Establish a quarantine zone around the Sol system. No Confederation forces are authorized to enter human space without direct authorization from this command." The words that followed would become known as the Human Doctrine, taught in every alien military academy and diplomatic school. "We have encountered a species that fights not for conquest or resources, but for the fundamental right to exist according to their own nature. They possess a capacity for sacrifice and determination that exceeds all known parameters. Further engagement is deemed inadvisable." As the massive alien fleet began its withdrawal, Admiral Torres stood among the ruins of his command center and watched humanity's first interstellar war come to an end. Not through surrender or negotiation, but through the simple demonstration that some species would rather face extinction than accept slavery. Months later, Human colony ships began moving beyond the quarantine zone, carrying families and children and the dream of freedom among the stars. The galaxy watched and waited, understanding finally that humanity had earned its place not through superior technology or military might, but through the terrifying realization that they would pay any price for the right to determine their own destiny. In the end, the Confederation's greatest victory was learning when not to fight, and humanity's greatest victory was teaching the galaxy that some things are worth any sacrifice, any cost, any risk. The quarantine zone became not humanity's prison, but their shield, maintained not by alien fear of human weapons, but by alien respect for human determination. The galaxy was large enough for everyone, but it belonged to those who were willing to fight for their piece of it. And throughout the stars, when young aliens asked their elders why the humans were different, the answer was always the same. Because they fight as if they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And that, child, is the most dangerous thing in the universe.